I believe that there's only one thing that has the ability to heal us, and that is the body itself. So the human body has an inbuilt ability to heal itself. Well, if that is true, why are so many people sick? Because are people sick? They're very sick. I was shown yesterday that a huge big hospital has just been built on the island of Bermuda. Do you think that'll fix everything? No, it actually doesn't. And I know that every doctor and every nurse in that hospital loves these meetings. Because if everyone adhered to the principles you're learning here this week, less people will have to go to that hospital. Is that right? And we can actually keep that hospital for people who are in accidents and break their legs and half chop their arms off and etc., etc., etc. There is a place for surgery. There is a place for medicine. But really, most people should go through their whole life never having a medicine or ever even having to go there. Right? And who wants to go there? No. Hurts, doesn't it? Hurts when you get sick. It hurts when you break something. No, the human body's designed to heal itself. So then the million-dollar question is, why are so many people sick? And that's what I'd like to address in this meeting tonight. I'd like to look at the two main theories for the cause of disease in medicine today. I'd like to look at those two theories, and I'd like to assess those theories, and I'd like to have a look at their true role in the running of the human body, the working of the human body, the healing of the human body. Because to know how the human body heals, we need to know something about how it works. Is that right? That's right. And to know how it works, we've got to go to the CBD. Do you know where the central business district of the human body is? The inside workings of the cell. Do you know that Darwin's theory rested on what would happen when they found out about the inside workings of the cell? And we know about the inside workings of the cell. And you know, the inside workings of the cell disprove Darwin's theory. In fact, it was 1953, it made headlines in the newspaper. The headlines in the newspaper stated that the secret of life had been discovered. You see, two scientists, Watson and Crookes, have been able to unravel the DNA. What's the DNA? The DNA is the genetic code that is inside the nucleus of every cell in the body, except the red blood cell. You see, the blood is the carrier of nutrients to the CBD. It's the carrier of oxygen to the CBD. It's the carrier of water to the CBD. It's the carrier away of waste from the CBD. And it's the bone marrow that makes your red blood cells. Now, every other cell has the ability to remake itself. And it remakes itself according to the pattern or the formula that's inside that DNA. And the reason why the headline said secret of life had been discovered, because they thought when they understood the DNA, then they would know the cause of disease, and then they'd be able to heal all diseases. That's 64 years ago. Have we healed all diseases? Are we any closer? I'd like to suggest that we're no closer, especially when the hospitals are getting bigger. Yeah. So something else arose when Watson and Crookes had been able to unravel the DNA. You see, that DNA they were able to pull out. And I'm sure we've all seen pictures of it. 23 chromosomes from our mother, 23 chromosomes from our father. A lot of information in this DNA. In fact, one writer said that if you put all the information on that DNA and put it into paperback books and stack them up on top of each other, they'd go to the moon and back quite a few times. I can hardly get my mind around that one. All curled up in the DNA. Incredible. In Psalm 139, the psalmist says, I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvellous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. And that psalmist knows what I've just told you. I hope I'm doing everything right here. Do you know what the problem was for the evolutionists, when Watson and Crick had been able to unravel the DNA, this is the question they could not answer and they still cannot answer. Who put the information in the DNA? Who put it there? None other. It could be none other than a creator God. That creator God put that information there, and that creator God made our bodies with the ability to heal itself. So do genes cause disease? Do they? Do you know there's another field of research today called epigenetics, and that's the effect of our lifestyle on our genes. My mother died at 51, a cripple in rheumatoid arthritis. Now, my genes have a strong tendency towards rheumatoid arthritis. But you'll notice that I'm not 51, I'm actually 64. And if you probably noticed, I'm not in a wheelchair and I'm not dead. You see, genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. Praise God. Because we are all born with a loaded gun. What I'm going to show you is how you can switch the trigger on and how you can switch the trigger off. Amen. So let's have a look at this DNA. We need to know a little bit about this DNA. The outside strands are made up of polysaccharides. Polysaccharides means many sugars. And everything we eat is made out of many sugars. The pumpkin soup we just ate, you call it squash, we call it pumpkin. The cornbread, all made up of many sugars. And the outside strand is made up of those many sugars. The inside strands is made up of amino acids, and amino acids is a breakdown from the protein that we eat. So in our soup tonight, there was a bit of protein, probably a little bit in everything, in the cornbread, in the vegetables that are in the soup, and minerals. And the highest mineral food is vegetables, and I noticed there are a few little dark green bits in that soup, celery leaves. Hippocrates said, let food be our medicine and medicine be our food. And he didn't even know about what I've just shown you there. See, he's 400 years BC. But the very food we eat is actually what our DNA is made up of. And when I look in some supermarket trolleys, I think, how will their DNA ever be made? Do you know, that's one of the reasons. One of the reasons why we're sick is because people do not realise that what they're eating is actually what they're going to live and move tomorrow. And what a pity that McDonald's ever came to your island or your Kentucky Fried, huh? Is McDonald's here yet? Forgive me. Forgive me. Because you know the quickest way to the pearly gates is through the golden archways. So hopefully the Bermudas will band together to try and stop that one. So the DNA is made up of the food that we eat, and we're constantly being remade. We've got new eye cells every 1 to 2 days. That's why if you get something in your eye, you've got to get it out quick or the eye cells will grow over it. And by the way, you are distracted. Am I right? When you get something in your eye, you cannot rest. What's the body saying to you? Get it out, and get it out quick. The next quickest cells to be made are the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. So the lining of your gastrointestinal tract basically looks like that. The new cells are made down here. I think it's tomorrow night I'm going to take you on a journey through your gastrointestinal tract. It's an interesting journey. We're going to start at the mouth and we're going to end up down the other end. And most people don't realise what happens in there. But there's an old proverb, Proverb 14 verse 6, that states, knowledge is easy to him that understands. When you understand that journey, you begin to you have the knowledge now of how to treat it and what to put in there. You've got a new skin every month. Where does the old skin go? Isn't that why we wash our bodies and wash our clothes and wash our sheets? Because you're constantly giving off those dead cells. We've got new bones every 3 months. You've got a new liver under your right rib about every 6 weeks, 6 weeks for your liver, 1 month for your skin, and 3 months for your bones. In fact, it has been said that takes about 2 years and we've got a new body. I used to say to people, look after this body, it's the only one you've got. You can't get a new one. Well, you actually can, if you give it the right conditions. You see, the human body was designed to heal itself, and it wasn't designed to deteriorate as quick as it is. Sometimes I have ladies sitting in front of me and I think, 80, I guess. And then I find out their age, 60. Woo. Mind you, when I was 20, I thought 40 was really old. And when I was 40, I thought 60 was really old. Now that I'm 60, I'm hesitant to say 80 is really old. The human body will deteriorate, but people are deteriorating far too young. Far too young. And you will find out why. What I'd like to show you now is how a new cell is made, because we're constantly being remade according to the pattern, according to the formula. But before I go there, nothing I do will change the fact that I have white skin, that I have brown hair, that I have blue eyes, and that I'm 5'2.5". Nothing will change that. High heel shoes might make me look a little bit higher, but nothing will change that. And because nothing can change the colour of our skin, our hair, our eyes, our height, it seems like a tiny little step to say nothing will change the fact that my mother died of rheumatoid arthritis at 51 and so will I. Can you see why they've done what seems like a tiny little step? And if I had 6 foot long legs, I could do a huge step for you, but it's actually a giant step. Can you see why they're blaming genes? But when people blame genes, they actually take away all responsibility for what's happening in them. Can you see that's why it's another popular theory? Let's have a look at how the new cell is made. Let's make a new gastrointestinal tract cell. And the gastrointestinal tract cell is remade every 3 to 5 days. DNA, even though it can be stretched out, it cannot leave. And so a photocopy is made. It truly is the CBD. Do you know there are little motors in there? There are little conveyor belts. It's astonishing what medicine is finding out now about the inside working of the cell. So the RNA is the photocopy of the DNA. It comes down to another section of the cell called ribosome. Now, ribosome is a little factory where the new cell is made. What's fascinating is all the information on how to make a whole new body is inside every cell, but we don't want every other information. We only want the gastrointestinal tract information. So everything else is switched off and the information we need or want is switched on. The new cell starts to be made. I'm going to explain it like the building of a brick wall. So the first brick goes down and it's tyrosine. You see, we're built up, you've probably heard this, of amino acids. Tyrosine, the next one is, say, methionine. The next one is phenylalanine. The next one is lysine. Can you see what's happening here? Different cells, different amino acids, have different shapes. And each amino acid fits into the next one just like the pieces of a jigsaw. And every 3 to 5 days, out pops a new gastrointestinal tract cell. Well, what about an irritable bowel syndrome cell? What about a Crohn's disease cell? Colitis, gastritis. These are all cells that are inflamed in the gastrointestinal tract. If the cells lining the gastrointestinal tract are remade every 3 to 5 days, how come someone doesn't heal of these conditions in, let's be generous, 2 weeks? Is that a reasonable question? I'd like to suggest it's very reasonable. And we should ever be private investigators, investigating why these things are so. So let's have a look at how a new irritable bowel syndrome cell is made. The first brick goes down. Maybe tyrosine is present. But we immediately come across a problem. There's a piece of information missing. What's going to go there now? I heard of a lady that used to make a beautiful cake, and everyone wanted the recipe, but she'd leave one ingredient out. So no one could make her cake. I think it's a bit silly myself. Because you make a cake and it's gone, isn't it? Someone made some beautiful cornbread out there. I don't think there's any left. But you see my point. If there's a piece of information missing, it's not going to work. The body's not quite sure what to do now, and so there's a rogue cell roaming around, and this rogue cell is a breakdown from chemicals, it's a breakdown from genetically modified foods, it's a breakdown from heavy metals, and the body doesn't know it. It doesn't know what to do. And so it's roaming around, it seems a spot, and in it goes. Now the next one comes along, maybe that's phenylalanine. Where does it fit? Can you see that it hasn't got a spot to go into? And we've just discovered another problem. The person's mineral deficient. And minerals are the glue that glues it all together. And just when the body's wondering what to do now, there's another piece of information missing. And here we have another rogue cell coming along, and it's just going to poke itself anywhere it wants. And every 3 to 5 days, out comes a new irritable bowel syndrome cell. Oh, can you see that I've just tipped the iceberg, so to speak, of all the things that might cause the problem? Aren't there enzymes constantly going up and down, healing any glitches? Oh, yes. But if the person's not supplying the nutrients to make the enzymes, can you see not even they will be there? What I'd like to do now is I'd like to have a look at really the question that's probably...
Want people to take your business seriously? Introducing GoDaddy Email and Microsoft 365
on all of your minds, which is what causes the damage? What's causing those pieces of information to be missing? Question mark. Do you know Rudyard Kipling wrote a whole poem on why? He said, I have 6 trusty serving men. They taught me all I know. Their names are what, why, when, where, how and who. Do you have your 6 trusty serving men? Do you take them everywhere you go? And if someone gets impatient with your whys, you politely excuse yourself and you leave. And you find someone who will. Always be very gracious. What causes the damage? 92% of DNA damage, the research is showing today, is caused by a mineral deficiency. How could we be mineral deficient? I know in Australia, Aussies only ever used to eat the white heart of the iceberg lettuce. Now we eat greens. Jamie Oliver, famous Australian cook, who's, if I see a few nods, I think he brought greens into Aussie kitchens. He even chops up food and doesn't wear gloves, have you noticed? And he brought a lot of fresh food into the kitchens. In Australia now, we eat kale, we eat rocket, we eat coriander. I know in America they call it cilantro. I know in Bermuda you're a bit of a mix between the English and the Americans, aren't you? In America, some of the words I say they've never heard of, so I have to do a bit of an adjustment. It's like I was telling someone the spelling of the rebounder, knee duck, N-E-E-D, and they wrote a W. But it's E-E. Anyway, little things like that. So mineral deficiency. How could we be mineral deficient when we're eating more greens? Well, now we have to look at the way they're grown. And in Australia today, a lot of farmers, they just grow for money, for dollars. The cheapest is superphosphate. And superphosphate in the soil locks up the minerals, so the plant doesn't get them. It knocks back the microbes that are designed to get the nutrients out of the soil and into the plant. So now the plant's deficient. And so all the bugs eat the plant. What plant do all the bugs eat? The weak one. That's a good illustration of what human beings get sick. So the bugs hit the plant, and then the farmer comes along and sprays the plant, and then it's picked too early, and then it's stored too long. I don't know if there's anything left in that. in that food. There's a very interesting book called The Calcium Lie by Dr. Robert Thompson, and he shows in his book, he has the figures that in Australia, I know the figures, that 50 years ago, they had 50% more minerals in the soil than they have today. So if the soils are deficient, the plants are deficient, the human being that eats the plant is deficient. That's right. That's right. But Dr. Robert Thompson says the clearest indication of a creator God, and I'm on the island of Bermuda, I can just point out wherever I go and you'll see sea. He says seawater is the clearest indicator of a creator God, because that seawater is the exact same mineral balance and proportion as is found in the bones, in the blood, in the tissue, muscles, the fluid that our cells live in. So you know what the cheapest salt is? Go down to the cleanest looking beach and just get bottles of seawater. Cook with it. A teaspoon of salt is equal to 1 cup of seawater. Now I hear your seawater is even saltier. So you'd have to play with that a little bit. So like the cornbread that was made, say there's a teaspoon of salt in there, you just put a cup of seawater in. You see that? If it's half a teaspoon of salt, then you would just put a cup of seawater and a cup of plain water, or half a cup of anyway, you get it. How easy is that? So that was one of the cheapest and easiest ways to increase your mineral content in your body, is start putting a little bit of that water out there. The good news is you don't have to drink seawater. Aren't you glad? Even just to take a little sip before every glass of water, that's easy, real easy. So no wonder there's so much mineral deficiency when we realise that the soil that our plants are growing in is so deficient. There's more. There are some stimulants that people are taking that are leaching the minerals out of the body. So this is sugar, and I'm not referring to the sugar cane, I'm referring to the pure crystallised acid that's been extracted from the sugarcane plant. It's a nasty substance. In fact, it is said that it leaves our body better dressed than when it went in. What does it leave our body dressed with? Our minerals. Caffeine. Are Bermudans addicted to caffeine as much as Australians and Americans? I'm in the airport, and I'm early in the airport. I had an early morning flight on, what day did I come here? Sunday. And there's only 2 shops that have got 20 people lined up. What are they? Starbucks Cafe. And they're even allowed to bring them on the plane now. They all seem to have got... I just had a look. I'd say 2 out of every 3 people had it. People say, do you drink coffee, Barbara? I say, no, I just watch the people suffer. Day 1 of our health retreat. And more people suffer from caffeine withdrawals than any other withdrawal. We have had people come off methamphetamines, heroin, methadone, alcohol, tobacco. No one suffers like the coffee drinker. Now, they'll recover quicker than the others, but the short-term suffering is the most extreme. I was in India a month ago, and I was talking about the dangers of caffeine, and one young mother said, I'm going to stop, because they love their chai tea, you know, their chai tea everywhere. She didn't have her chai tea, and within 1 hour she had a terrible headache. She said, I have to function, so I had half a cup of chai tea. I said, that was a good choice. What does she do every day? Little less, little less. Can you see that? Little less, little less. And then you can get off it without the pain and suffering. Caffeine disrupts the neurotransmitters in the brain. So you can have a couple both having coffee, maybe and chocolate, maybe Coke. They can give birth to a baby that has a tendency to Asperger's, hyperactivity, autism, all because of the parents' caffeine habits, which are causing a disruption in the neurotransmitters, which influences the way their neurotransmitters are made. Now, this is before they conceive. There's a few writers that are claiming that parents are the genetic engineers of their children. That's a bit scary, isn't it? Now, if you're feeling a little bit concerned right now because of your past habits, the good news is as soon as you give your body the right conditions, it turns around. It's a very forgiving piece of machinery. I think we'd all agree with that. So caffeine not only disrupts the neurotransmitters, causing an effect on the genes, it also leaches calcium and magnesium out of the body. So people that drink caffeine will be mineral deficient in calcium and magnesium, two very important minerals. Sugar not only leaches minerals, but it also causes a disruption in the DNA. I'll give you a story to illustrate. We had a 9-year-old girl do our program. She's type 1 diabetic, and she came with her mother. Do you know, within 2 days, on the third day, she had no insulin that day. Very quickly, the body starts to respond. But when we're consulting, I was asking her questions, and then I consulted with the mother, and the little girl said to the mother, "Mum, tell her." And the mother looked a little embarrassed. And she said, "Mum, tell her." And the mother looked a little embarrassed again. And then the little girl said, "She eats a bag of lollies a day." So do you call it lollies or candies? Oh, how can I say to that woman that it's quite possibly that habit that caused her child's diabetes? Ooh. Now, because she can't change what's happened, but you know what she can change? Tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow. Her little girl will recover. And I always say to people, especially women, you are not allowed to beat yourself up over this one. And there's a lovely verse in the Bible. It's one of many lovely verses, but it's Acts 17 verse 30 where it says, God winks at our ignorance, and so should we, okay? But just to give you an illustration, that people are not only sick through ignorance, they're actually giving defective DNAs to their children because of their ignorance. And really, they cannot be accountable if they don't know. And unfortunately, the big dollars have a monopoly on advertising. Does it say on your bottle of coffee, it can disrupt the neurotransmitters in your brain, so you give a defective DNA to your children? Does it tell you that? And does it tell, not yet, does it tell you on the sugar packet that this will cause diabetes? Does it tell you that? No. That's why we have to be our own doctors. We have to investigate it for ourselves. So we're looking at what causes a mineral imbalance in the body. Again, the mineral deficiency of plants and these things that are leaching. Another stimulant is alcohol. Children are being born today with fetal alcohol syndrome to parents that have 2 drinks a week. And there are some doctors that tell people to have a little red wine at night. But hasn't it got antioxidants in it? Well, Roundup's 99% water, so are we going to drink that? Alcohol is a deadly poison and it kills brain cells, and it certainly interferes with the DNA. Tobacco. In Australia, I don't know whether it's so in Bermuda, but there are some very graphic photographs on the packets. Do you have that, the packets of cigarettes? Oh, none of you probably know because you don't smoke, eh? In fact, a friend of mine's a naturopath, and he said to a guy that came to him who was a smoker, "So you prepared to get lung cancer?" And the guy said, "What do you mean?" And my friend said, "Haven't you read the packet?" Well, they don't, do they? But do you know what's even more serious is that it's affecting the DNA of the child. Now, a lady who's a smoker, it really isn't going to make a huge difference for her to stop smoking as soon as she's pregnant, because her years of smoking before that have already affected the DNA. Now, I'm glad she stopped smoking when she's pregnant, but some damage has already been done. But you know, if that child is brought up right and never smokes, then that weakened DNA need be manifest. That's the good news. In fact, When you read the Bible, you read about an incredible, merciful, forgiving God. Well, he gave us a very merciful, forgiving body too. Yeah. So what also causes damage in the DNA is genetically modified foods. A genetically modified food is the result of the DNA of two different species being spliced together. For instance, the DNA of an Atlantic salmon and the DNA of a tomato, hoping they'll get a tomato that grows in the snow. But actually it doesn't. And there's this huge grey area. Tomatoes are grown that have 5 centres. There's all this strange thing happening. They're playing with something that they have no knowledge of. And when a person eats genetically modified food, it has the ability to alter our DNA. Genetically modified foods can cause cancer. Because what's cancer? Mutated cells. What causes mutated cells? Genetically modified foods. If you put genetically modified foods into the net and put President Putin, Russia's president, do you know he's just passed a law, well, about a year ago, that any Russian who grows genetically modified food or sells it is to be considered a terrorist. Whoa. You have a look at his whole spiel. You know what he says? We Russians look at the West, over-vaccinated, over-medicated, you hear that? Overfed, sitting in front of boxes every night. And he said, we see it's weakening the West. And is it? Absolutely. Little by little by little. How can you be sure you're not eating genetically modified foods? Because I know in Australia and America, Monsanto is so big they win every court case, so you don't have to write it on the packet. Well, you're best to choose organic, because if an organic farmer uses genetically modified seed, they lose their organic status. So that's one of the safest ways to go. Also, electromagnetic field excess. We are electrical people. There's a spark of electricity in every cell in the body. We had a guy do our program and he said, I cannot come into your health centre if you've got Wi-Fi. In fact, we had to put him in a separate little house where there was no Wi-Fi at all. He said, you would do big business if you had an electromagnetic field free health retreat. I said, well, actually we wouldn't, because half of our guests are business people. They need to have contact at home. They need to pay staff midweek. But we encourage everyone well, where we have Wi-Fi, it gets shut off at night. So you spend a third of your life in that bedroom, and so it should be shut down at night. So I was interested to see why this guy reacted so badly when he came into a room that had Wi-Fi. So I put the detective hat on and I begin to investigate. And I find out that he had a root canal filling. Do you know a root canal filling is a dead tooth? And I have heard some horror stories of root canal fillings because there's no nerve in there to tell you there's anything wrong. And because it's dead, the body tries to remove it, so a little infection can come behind it. He had a root canal filling that went bam behind it, and it started to hurt. So instead of listening, do you know when something hurts, it's your body going, excuse me, can you do something? So he put a painkiller, took a painkiller. Do you know what a painkiller does? Stops the knot, but what's still happening? It's still having an effect there. So he just took painkillers. And then it really started to hurt. Unbeknownst to him, the tooth next door was starting to break down as well. And then the whole side of his head swelled up. You know, it starts with a little bit of a knock, then the sledgehammer comes in. Bang, bang. You've got to listen to that one, don't you? So he went and had the teeth out. But, you know, I'll draw you his body. Here's his body. So he's got these bad root canals that's poisoning his body. And then, to save the day, he had to take an antibiotic which killed off all his good bacteria but did kill the bad bacteria. And something else happened is they put Wi-Fi on his house. Here's another excess. And about that time he's had his ute. we call a utility, a ute. And he hadn't closed it up properly, and it had a lot of rain, so it went all mouldy. So that's a real toxic poison. And then he cleaned it with bleach. That's real toxic. And he was a smoker. 4,000 chemicals in one cigarette. So if he came into a room with Wi-Fi, can you see one more drop's coming into his body and he's starting to get overflow? So I can be in a room with Wi-Fi and I don't have an apparent reaction. Why is that? Because maybe my chemical or environmental poison load is only about down here. That's what chemical sensitivity is. It's just total overload. I said, mate, the best thing you can do is stop smoking. Well, he didn't like that. It was much easier to blame the Wi-Fi than the cigarettes. Yeah. So what can he do? He can come to a health retreat. He can stop smoking. He has to get into a house that had no Wi-Fi at all. And little by little, he can get that level down. Can you see that? So be very careful of your electromagnetic field exposure. There's supposed to be something like 80,000 research papers out there that have been done showing the dangers of it, but you don't hear much about it, do you? A lot of money in iPhones and iPads, yeah? And some of the research shows that when young girls put the iPad on their lap or the laptop computer on their lap, what's it called, laptop computer for the lap, well, they're finding that it's affecting the development of their eggs. These are girls 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then they're 30 now, 40% miscarriage in those girls. We had a young guy do our program, young guy about 38, and he had testicular cancer. He used to drive his little sports car with his laptop on his lap all the time. And the iPhone. How many people put their iPhone in their back pocket or their front pocket? And some girls are putting it in their bras. You can even buy a sports bra now with a pocket there. Ew. So men, get your man bag. You've heard of man bags, so men can have shoulder bags. So try not to have it on or near your body. And also don't have anything in your room while you're sleeping. So if you've got a television in your room, it must be off at the power point. Put your computers in the next room. If you're going to charge, it must be, unless you've got a big room and you can put it way over in the far corner. The good news is 20 minutes distance from your device can reduce your exposure by 3/4. That's pretty good, isn't it? In Australia, the Australian Health Department, 20 inches. Did I say 20 minutes? Yeah. Get it right. 20 inches. The Australian Health Department. Now, the Australian Health Department are very much influenced by media, very much influenced by big industry, but it must be bad for them to say that there is no safe exposure for a child under the age of 2 to electromagnetic devices. Under the age of 2. Now, I've been in the airport a lot lately, and here's a mother with a baby in the pram. Baby looked about 10 months old, and mother's busy on her phone and rocking the pram, hoping to put the baby to sleep or keep the baby quiet so she can still do her Facebook. And the handles of the pram, there was an iPad on there. You can actually get them to clip onto the pram so the baby's watching. Oh, I'd never seen such a thing. And you know what I used to do to my babies? I had slings. They were strapped to my chest. Happy babies. But I'm so much in the airport and I see them, they're trying to get that baby asleep and they've got the... Do you know it's a highly addictive thing, Facebook? And the games, highly addictive. They're considering they're more addictive than drugs today. So that brings us to chemicals. Chemicals can damage the DNA. So be very careful of what you're cleaning your house with. Go back to what grandmother did, white vinegar. White vinegar is getting the scum off the bathroom. and sodium bicarbonate. You live in a very moist environment. You put bleach on mould, you create one of the most toxic mixtures on the planet. And what bleach will do is kill mould and feed fungus. And fungus is the next crop of mould. But white vinegar will kill it and won't kill you. Sodium bicarbonate. And if you want something really potent, mix the sodium bicarbonate and the vinegar together. It's fun. It gets all fizzy. And then scrub into that. So very important that you make sure your houses are high, dry, airy. And if you see any taint of anything like that, use your white vinegar and your sodium bicarbonate. So get the chemicals out of your homes, out of your toothpaste, out of your shampoo, out of your food. But the biggest chemical company in the world, I know it's the biggest chemical company in the world because this company, the pharmaceutical company, makes more profits than anything. Billions every year. And you know, the Bible talks about this. It talks about it in Revelation 18 verse 23. And it's talking about Babylon going down, and it says, her merchants were the great men of the earth. Who are the great men of the earth? The wealthy men? Her merchants were the great men of the earth, which deceived all nations. How many? By her sorceries. But you know what the conversion is from the Greek? Pharmakia. Do you have pharmacies here? What do pharmacies sell? Do you know the Bible? So with pharmakia, magic potions. See, drugs never cure disease. They just change the form and location of a disease. Now, in a crisis, a drug can save a life. Absolutely. But I'm not talking about the crisis. I'm talking about everyday little bits and pieces that happen to us that can be actually recovered quite simply. And the thalidomide tragedy is a reminder to us of what drugs can do to the DNA, to the unborn child, yeah? You're familiar with the thalidomide tragedy? Mothers were given thalidomide in about the 50s for morning sickness, and the babies were born without arms. And it took a while for them to connect that. Also, mould. Now, fungus can overtake creatures. David Attenborough has a show where the ants grow mould or fungus in little underground, and the ants take the waste or the dust coming off from the mould, roll it into little balls, and it's their food. They store it in their caves. David Attenborough noticed that the ant will never tend the fungus for more than half an hour. So they have this shift work. You know, the proverb says, consider the ant, thou sluggard. Well, consider the ant with this one. If the ant tends the fungus too long, the fungus overtakes the ant. It happens in trees, lichen, they reproduce themselves through the tree. What about humans? Let's have a look at what mould is. It's a microorganism. It's one of millions, probably, different microorganisms. Now, as the name implies, micro means microscopic, organism means it's a living thing. They're everywhere. They're in the air we're breathing. They'd be on every surface area. They're on our skin. They're in our ears, our nose, our mouths. In fact, there are 10 times more microorganisms in the human body than cells. And the largest amount is found in our gastrointestinal tract. Does that mean we're more plant than animal? Actually, fungus, bacteria, and yeasts and molds are actually a classification of their own. They're neither plant nor animal, but they're everywhere. They're all through our body. And they do an important role of building up the body. But whenever cell damage happens, these microorganisms have the ability to change roles. Now, this ability to change roles is something that makes them quite amazing and yet quite dangerous. So let's have a look at how they do it in a helpful way. So whenever cell damage happens, these microorganisms now evolve into a clean-up team. Or one microbiologist said to them, we call them garbage collectors. That's what we call them as pathologists. That's what they do. They collect the garbage. And their name is bacteria. That's what bacteria is. That's what it does. It's just there to clean up the mess. Florence Nightingale, very famous nurse. You've heard of Florence Nightingale? She was in the 1850s, and what she did in the 1850s, she was asked to go to Scutari. Now, Scutari is the port where the wounded were being taken from the Crimean War. So this is about 1854. So here's Crimea. The British and the French were fighting the Russians. Here's the Black Sea. The wounded were put in boats and sailed down to Scutari. And Scutari is the port where the hospital was. Now, a journalist named Russell, he went from England to report on the war. And he was shocked at what he saw. When he came back, he wrote headlines in the newspapers. The headline said, "Did we raise our young men to die, to rot in this hospital?" You see, 50% of the men that actually got to the hospital died in the hospital. This is strong young men in their 20s, 30s. So very quickly, the British government sent Florence Nightingale and 35 nurses to Scutari to see what they could do. Florence was shocked. It was just filthy. There was raw sewage in the corridors. See, this was ex-army Turkish barracks. It actually wasn't built for a hospital. She found a man that was still in his battle clothes 2 weeks after he'd been admitted. The doctors were not washing their hands between operations. They thought, oh, well, I'm bloody all any, I may as well go to the next one. In fact, the doctors hated her because she made them wash their hands. She immediately telegrammed the British government and she said, we need a sanitary commission. We need a group of people to come here and assess this situation. So the sanitary commission, they came, and this is what they found, that this is where the hospital was built, in a swamp. They found a dead horse. This is a dead horse, in case you don't know. A dead horse, a dead dog. This was in the water that they were drinking. This was in the water that they were cleaning the wounds with. Ew. Now, within 6 months of the Sanitary Commission making their findings known, and very quickly things started to happen, and inside the hospital, Florence and her nurses were working hard. Florence was the daughter of a very wealthy Englishman. That's why she brushed shoulders with the politicians. That's why, for a woman, in that time, she had a bit of power. And she asked her father for a shipload of clean mattresses, clean linen, clean bandages, etc., etc., etc. Within 6 months of Florence being there and the Sanitary Commission making or acting on their findings, the death rate went from 50% to 2%. Now, 18 months later, Florence went back to London. And she was about to get off the boat and she looked out and she saw a welcoming party. There was Queen Victoria and Prince Albert hailing her as a heroine. Well, she didn't like that. She changed her name to Mary Smith, went down the back gangplank and went home. They said to her later, "Why did you do that?" She said, "I am not a heroine." She said, "All I did was increase hygiene, sanitation and nutrition." Got that? Hygiene, that's personal hygiene. Sanitation, that's the home. That's the house, keeping it clean. And nutrition, you cannot heal without nourishment, as you can see from your DNA. In fact, you know what their food was? Big pots of water with bits of rotten meat in it. You cannot heal without nourishment. That's like asking my sons who are builders, carpenters, tilers, to build us an extension, but we don't supply any building materials. The body can heal itself if you give it the right building materials. Now, I want to show you another graph that you will never see in any newspaper. You will never see this graph. Here, one side of the graph, we've got all the childhood diseases: mumps, measles, rubella, whooping cough, tetanus, polio. Did you hear that, polio? All 80 to 90% wiped out. Then the vaccines were introduced. Polio? Aren't we told that vaccines stopped polio? Did you know that there was no polio in London? No polio until they started putting arsenic and lead in paint and putting spraying with DDT. If you have a look at the graphs, here's the arsenic and the lead in the paint, and here's the DDT, and here's polio. Got that? No polio till then. They realised what was happening, so they stopped the arsenic and the lead in paints, and they stopped spraying with DDT, and guess what happened to polio? And there it is there before the vaccine. Now, we're not told that, are we? But we've got another graph now. It's attention deficit syndrome, hyperactivity, Asperger's, autism, epilepsy, cot death. Children are not dying of infectious diseases anymore because of what Florence Nightingale did. Did you know that in the 1850s, all the sewage from London went into the Thames and the people in London drank that water? No wonder the Black Plague happened. No wonder there was so much disease. That's why it is elementary that we understand these microbes. They're just opportunist organisms. You know what Florence did? She just cleaned up that hospital so that there was nothing for them to eat. Did you see that? Let's go back to the kookaburra. Have you heard of the kookaburra? It's a bird that we have in Australia. And there's a song called Laugh Kookaburra, gay your life must be, because it's that's what it sounds like. My children don't allow me to do that if they're there. So let's say the kookaburra dies in the bush. What happens to the kookaburra? It doesn't stay there, does it? It starts to break down and the bacteria cleans it up. And it's not long after that that we've got another stage. It's the yeast and the fungus. And as it does its work, the environment changes, and then the mould. And then it's not long after the mould stage that the matter is brought back to dust. The yeast and fungus stage, we can call them the exterminators. That's what they do. They're busy on the rainforest floor. And then the undertakers is the nickname you can give to the mould. That's what undertakers do. They take away dead things till eventually matter is brought back to dust. What I have drawn for you here is the carbon cycle, or you could call it the cycle of life. You see, nothing's created and nothing's destroyed. It just changes form. And what does the preacher say at the funeral? Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. What's he referring to? He's referring to what's going to happen in the coffin. Now there's he should be famous. He's a 6 times professor. His name is Antoine Bourchon, a Frenchman who was a contemporary at the time of Louis Pasteur. Louis Pasteur was a chemist. Antoine Bourchon, 6 times professor. Antoine Bourchon, he knew this. He knew that germs don't cause disease, they're the result of unhealthful conditions. But Louis Pasteur got popularity because he came up with a theory everyone loved. Oh, you poor thing, it's not you, it's the germ. The germ has made you sick. Take this poison to kill the germ and you will be well. But Antoine Bourchon, he said diseases are born in us and of us. Oh, that's not very nice. Can you see why it's not a popular theory? In fact, when Florence Nightingale read of Louis Pasteur's theory, she said, "This is the theory of a man of a very unstable mind." And she said, "And anyone who believes it is equally unstable." Germs don't cause disease, they're the result. Now, can you imagine if Florence Nightingale went into that hospital with bag loads of drugs and just killed everything by giving everyone lots of drugs, would that have fixed the problem? See, if you don't take that dead horse out of the water supply, it's just common sense. And you know there's been a death and no one attended the funeral because no one knew he'd died. It was the death of common sense. We need some common sense. You just got to clean up the place. That's why she said, "I'm not a heroine, I just cleaned up the place." How come Florence knew and the doctors didn't? She read her Bible. Have you ever read of the cleanliness rules that God gave Moses for the children of Israel in the desert for 40 years? If they wanted to go to the bathroom, we say toilet, but in America that's a rude word, but your English rule a bit, so toilet's acceptable. They had to dig a hole and then bury it so that no one had ever knew they'd been there. And if someone died, they had to take the dead person out of the camp and bury it in a deep hole. And the men that carried the dead person out of the camp, they could not go back in the camp for 3 days. They had to wash all their clothes, wash their body. You know, the record is there was no disease for 40 years in that camp. So those doctors should have been reading their Bibles. Then the sewage wouldn't have been going into the Thames, yeah? And then there wouldn't have been the sickness that has been there. We say in Australia, they're barking up the wrong tree. Do you have that saying? Yeah. The microbes have been shot, but as you can see by my illustrations here, the microbes are an integral part of life on planet Earth. And if it wasn't for that carbon cycle, there'd be so much rubbish on the planet, we wouldn't be able to walk on the planet. We need to understand their role. We need to work with them. And if they are out of control in the body, we need to be asking, why are they out of control? We've got to get away from this kill mentality. Antoine Beauchamp got a dead cat. He wrapped it in an airtight container, came back 4 months later, opened his container. What was in his container now? One lady said, "A dead cat." Dust. Dust. Airtight container. Dust. What brought cat back to dust? Because when the kookaburra dies in the bush, the dung beetles come up, the worms come up, the blowfly lays its maggots, the dingo has a nibble, the crow has a nibble. But in an airtight container, there was nothing to help with the breakdown. The microorganisms that were an integral part of living, running cat took their suit of clothes off, so to speak, put their rubber gloves and apron on, and became the clean-up team. As the environment changed, the undertakers, well, first of all the exterminators, then the undertakers, till eventually these microbes have brought matter back to dust. With great excitement, Antoine Beauchamp took the dust, put it under the microscope. It was alive with microorganisms. They'd done their job. Do you know there's a basic law of science that states nothing's created and nothing's destroyed. It just changes form. This is why we have compost bins, is that right? Because when we have compost bins, it's full of vegetable matter that's getting broken down. And by the way, what breaks it down? The microbes that were responsible for the development of the apple, then the ripening of the apple, and then the rotting of the apple. You see, they just change roles compared to the environment. And now I dig up my compost bin and I put it into the soil. Here's my plant. Here are its roots. So I put my compost in. What am I putting into my garden? Microbes. Now they play another role. Now, those microbes are responsible for the final breakdown of the minerals in the soil and the heavy metals. Those microbes are responsible for the absorption of the minerals out of the soil and into the plant. They are responsible for protecting the plant against any harmful pathogens that might be in the soil, and they are also responsible for nourishment of the plant. That's why organically grown fruits and vegetables have a far higher nutrient content, because of the microbes in the soil. Now I want to take it somewhere you may never have taken it before. Inside the human body. When we were in our mother's utero, our gut was sterile, no microbes. And when we were born, we were literally showered with our mother's microorganisms. So that first breath of air, remember what's right next to the birth canal? The anus. Do you know 20, 40 years ago, doctors, nurses always gave mothers enemas because they don't want anything coming out of there going anywhere near the baby. In fact, one professor who's an obstetrician, he said, I always thought God made a mistake. But he said, I now know it's a perfect design. Because when that birth canal stretches open, so does the anus. And what's the air like coming out of there? Laden with the mother's microbes. And when that baby's skin hits the air, the baby goes, what a wolf. And the baby swallows. And those microbes come down and they form a thick coating over the lining of the gut. And the mother's milk doesn't come in for 3 days. She has a thick, yellow, creamy thing, milky substance called colostrum, and that is rich with the mother's microbes. And that's also contributing to that. Do you know that a dairy farmer, if he has a cow with a baby calf and the cow dies in childbirth, if he can't get that calf onto another cow that's just had a baby, he knows that that calf will never be strong and possibly die. Because he knows that calf needs those first few days of colostrum. So what should we be making sure new mothers know something about? Feeding them. Yeah. Feeding that baby. And you know the sucking reflex is the strongest in the first hour of life. So that baby should be put straight onto that breast. And then, and some people will say, but there's no milk for 3 days. Oh, but there's something richer and more important than that milk. And do you know that those microbes are basically setting up our immune system? Those microbes are now in the gut responsible for the final breakdown of our food. Those microbes are responsible for the absorption of our food through and into the blood. Those microbes are our border protection. They protect our blood against any harmful pathogens that might happen to be in the gut, and they nourish those little cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. You'll never think about your microbes the same again, will you? Such an important part of the running of the human body. Now, I quoted Hippocrates a little earlier, where I said Hippocrates stated that food should be our medicine and medicine be our food. Well, he said something else. He said all disease begins in the gut. You see, when those microbes that line our gut are broken down, we've now lost proper absorption. We've now lost the breakdown. We've now lost our protection. We've now lost the nourishment to the cells that line our gut. Let me show you something else that's actually causing so many problems. and that is a very popular drug called antibiotic. You've heard of it? Oh, they even have it in Bermuda. Do you know Florence Nightingale? I love her story because she was about 80 years before they discovered antibiotics, and look at the results she got. What is an antibiotic? Let's break the word down. Against life. Now, anything that has the ability to kill a small organism has the potential to kill a large. And what are we? We're the large. 1% of doctors today are claiming that antibiotics are causing more problems than they ever cured. I'd like to address that. But let's first of all have a look at where antibiotics, how they were discovered. Alexander Fleming, 1929, he's growing bacteria in flasks in his laboratory. He comes in one morning and they're all dead. And he knew Newton's third law of motion: to every action there's an equal and an opposite reaction. So he began to investigate. Nothing in the laboratory could have done it. And then he noticed near his flasks there was an open window. And there was sun's rays coming in at that moment, and it was heavy with a dust. And he noticed it was coming in and landing on his bacteria, so he investigated more. And he looked out, and the next window on the next story was open with a big plate of fruit on the bench there and a mouldy orange on the plate of fruit. Do you remember the story from school days? That mouldy orange was giving off a dust, and that dust came down, settled on his bacteria and killed it. Now, that dust coming out of the mould has its spore in it, but also is a highly toxic gas designed to kill off anything that would compete with the mould's food source. It's as if the mould says, this is my orange and no one else is going to get it. I'm going to give off a toxic gas. So Alexander Fleming called the mould penicillium. Alexander Fleming called the mould waste. Now, the mould waste is more toxic than the mould. And he called the mould waste penicillic acid. That is the penicillin that we know today. Now, penicillin has saved the lives of, we're probably looking at millions today. Granted. But we've got another problem has arisen. That's the overuse of the antibiotics and the inability of the physician to ask, why are they there? I have a few friends who are physicians, and they say to me, sometimes people come in and say, I've got a bad cough. Can you give me an antibiotic? And my friend says, you don't need an antibiotic. You need to stop smoking. You need to have some vitamin C and some garlic and go to bed early. And they get up and go, huh? And they go to the next doctor who'll give it to them. But the good news is, my friend who's a physician, you can't even get in to see her. So obviously there are a lot of people who are looking at alternative things today. But I'm very thankful to antibiotics because it was an experience I had with antibiotics that got me on the natural path. You see, my first daughter, when she was 16 months old, she got an earache. I was a nurse. I was trying to be a bit of a back-to-nature hippie lifestyle, but I didn't know what to do when a child got sick. And everyone said to me, don't play with her ears. She'll go deaf. So I went to the doctor because of this. Yeah? And I didn't know what to do, and no one I knew what to do. So I gave her the antibiotic. I didn't want her to go deaf. Within 24 hours, she was feeling better. She finished her course, and the earache came back. What do? 6 weeks later, 4 courses of antibiotics later. And what's the definition of insanity? I'm so frustrated. I don't know what to do. So the doctor is writing the 5th script of antibiotics. And I said to him, I've just got one question. Will my daughter be on antibiotics for the rest of her life? Am I coming to that conclusion? I'm thinking, where's this going to end? Will I be doing this 5 years later? Is there anything to indicate that anything's changed here? He was challenged by my question, and so he gave me a referral to an ear, nose and throat specialist. The ear, nose and throat specialist looked in Emma's ears, looked in her mouth, said, the child's teething. Give her these drops to keep the eustachian tubes clear. That was it. 2 years later, next child. He's 18 months, he gets an earache. I don't tell anyone. So then I'm not going to get pressured. And I go to the old lady next door. I'm 25, she's 85. I said, what did your mother do when you were a little girl? She said, Mum would steam up an onion on the ear, and put it on the ear. Well, I ran home, steamed up an onion, wrapped it in a cloth, put it on my son's ear. He was breastfed, so he fell asleep. I could do anything to him when he was feeding. Fell asleep. And I laid him, I put a thick towel there, folded over a few times and laid him on the onion. And he slept for 2 hours. What does that tell you? He's okay. He woke up happy. He remained happy. He's still happy. He's 40 now and he has not ever had an antibiotic. How many 40-year-olds can say that? No, not many. Not many. And he's still alive too. By the way. Is it any wonder that I went into natural medicine? Most people should go through their whole life never having one. But most people don't know what to do with little things. I read a newspaper article about 100 people who got the flu. 50 took antibiotics, 50 didn't, all got better. Got that? They all got better. One lady, she was next guest, she said, I went on an antibiotic a few months ago. I said, why? Well, I got a cold and it was 2 weeks later and I was still coughing. I said, yeah, you will. You will. If you noticed, you get a cold, get a cough, you'll cough for a couple of weeks. Don't worry about it. How else is the junk going to get out? The human body will heal itself. There's a little tiny 2-letter word here, if you give it the right conditions. We should be making our decisions on fact. And when we make our decision on fact, then we have faith. Faith in an amazing body with an ability to heal itself. I'm not against antibiotics. They certainly can save lives, but most people should never have them. One lady rang me up, she said, Barbara, my first little boy was vaccinated, always sick. I gave him antibiotics every time he got a cough or a cold. He's 5 now, he's always sick. She said, I've got an 10-month-old baby. I haven't vaccinated, he's strong, but he's got a cold. He's got green coming out of his nose, pulling his ears, and he's got a cough, and I've got a script for an antibiotic, and I don't want to give it to him. What can I do? I've heard that you raised 8 children without drugs. And by the way, they're still all alive too. And Michael and I have 18 grandchildren and they're all still alive. She said, what can I do? I said, slice up some slice up garlic finely, wrap it in a cloth and bind it to the bottom of his feet. You don't put the garlic straight on the soles of the feet or you will blister the skin. And the biggest problem with that is you can't put garlic on again until it heals. You can smell it on their breath within a couple of minutes. You see, the biggest pores in the whole of your body are on the soles of your feet. And make sure you open the window. How often are all the windows shut? Those lungs need that fresh air. I said, get him outside. Make sure he's warm. Put a hat on him. Oh, I find it difficult when I see a baby with nothing on their feet. Especially in this cold air conditioning, you must keep their extremities warm. She said, all right, now what else? I said, oh, that should be enough. She said, that's all? I said, yeah, make sure the baby only has breast milk until the baby's healed. Well, what should I do? I said, well, make sure you eat well, make sure you're drinking lots of water. I guess you could up your vitamin C. She was a little disappointed that there was not a whole list of things to do. Well, I got a phone call 3 days later, and when I answered it, she just said, wow. She said, my baby recovered. My baby recovered quicker than my son used to recover on the drugs. It's so simple. It's so very simple. And what the natural remedies do, they also bring relief. So the onion, again, is very good for the ear. Have a look at this word. Mould, the medical term for mould is mycotoxin. What's a toxin? It's a poison. They were so excited about the discovery of antibiotics that they tested hundreds of different mould wastes, and 80% of them were so deadly they killed the rats they were tested on. In other words, penicillin isn't deadly enough to kill you outright, but if you keep it up, guess what? They have tested now and documented approximately 1.5 million different moulds, yeasts and funguses. Now, my biggest critic is my husband. If I can pass Michael, I can pass anyone. So he takes me to task if he thinks something doesn't add up, because he said, Barbara, if you're not accurate, you're going to lose the men. He said, you'll lose me. I said, well, check me out. 1.5 to 5 million. He thought 1 million was a bit over the top, and then he discovered that's nearly 5 million now. And every mould waste has a different effect on a different body part. For instance, in 1921, Japan passed the Rice Act. That put stringent rules on the storing of cooked rice, because there was an epidemic all through Asia of cardiac beriberi, and they traced it to the mould on cooked rice. Now it's moulding before you even see it. That's why you go to Asia, you'll never eat day-old rice, because the Rice Act said the rice must be cooked daily. Cardiac beriberi was wiped out. So that type of mould that was growing on the rice, the mould waste directly affected the heart. There's a book called The China Study by Dr. Colin Campbell. And in his book, he shows that the mould Aspergillus, giving off the mould waste aflatoxin, was causing the liver cancer. So they're illustrations to show that different mould wastes affect different body parts. So when I say 1% of doctors today are claiming that antibiotics are causing more problems than they ever cured, what am I referring to? I'm actually referring to the fungal or mould link with disease. We have quite a few books in our library at home, and one book is called Cancer is a Fungus. And it's by an Italian oncologist named Dr. Tullio Simoncini. And he's been having remarkable results with cancer, 90% success rate, by injecting sodium bicarbonate straight into cancers. So does he have a Nobel Prize? No, he's lost all his credentials, and it's illegal for him to even test it now. The fungal link with disease is a very real one, especially when you realise that different mould wastes affect different body parts. Now, if you put, there's a documentary you can look up on YouTube. It's called Mouldy. And that is such an eye-opener. These people were so sick, and it was traced to mould in their house. So mould and its link with disease is very big. Why doesn't medicine acknowledge it? Well, then they would have to acknowledge that their antibiotics, all their statin drugs, their contraceptive pill, cortisones, are all contributing to the mould presence in the human body. So that is very real, and my book, Self-Heal by Design, unfortunately I could only bring one box with me, but you can get it off Amazon. It's called Self-Heal by Design, and my book is a thorough explanation of this brief talk I'm giving tonight. I have about $3,000 worth of books in my health centre, all showing the fungal link with disease. They're by scientists, professors from all over the world. And I bought those books because they're my reference material. So in my book, I act like a journalist, where I just pull this all together, because I found it's very difficult to get information on this, and I wanted to write a book that was short, succinct, you could just about read it in a day, where I look at the history of fungus with disease, I look at what the Bible says. Do you know what the Bible says if your house is mouldy, you've got to do? You've got to destroy it. You've got to take it to an unclean place out of the city. Now in Australia we call it the tip. Do you have a tip in Bermuda where you put all the rubbish? I look at the history of it. And then I give programs of how to conquer it in the body. Now, how can fungus or mould get into the body? It can get in through the skin. So never touch, if you've got a mouldy orange in your fruit bowl, never touch it. So what do? You get some tongs. Cover your, because you can breathe it in too, and take it out. So it can get through your skin. You can breathe it in. That's why in Bermuda you have to be very careful. I see some beautiful white roofs, and I was told that every 2 years, is it, that you clean the roof. And one of the reasons is that to keep them beautiful and white, and I'll have lots of beautiful photos to take back to my family. But also, your rainwater comes off there, is that right? Can you see if you've got a mouldy roof, what's happening to your rainwater? So it's very important you be mindful of that, living in this moist environment. So you can breathe it in, you can inhale it, and you can also get in through your mouth. The drinking water I was talking about, or on the food, or taking in antibiotics. So there are several ways that it can come in. Breathing it in, ingestion through the mouth, through the skin, and also sexually it can be transmitted. Do you know that all sexually transmitted diseases have a fungal base? AIDS has a fungal base. If you look at a medical dictionary under MyCo, M-Y-C-O, you'll have pages and pages of that. But the million-dollar question is, how do we get it out? Number one, starve it. What's its favourite food? Sugar. Sugar and yeasts as well. And you've also got to make sure there's nothing in your house. You've got to make sure the fans are on, air conditioning, dehumidifiers, whatever it takes to keep the air in your house clean. Check your fridges, check your air conditioning units, check your water, because wherever you've got water sitting, mould will grow where there's damp, where it's dark, where there's no sun and no fresh air. One of the beauties of Bermuda too is you've got this lovely sea breeze from every angle, haven't you? And that fresh air will keep it dry. So you've got to starve it. So if someone comes to me with a yeast problem, how will they know? The tongue's a good guide. The tongue should be pink from the tip to the back. That's probably the first thing everyone does after this meeting. Let's go and look at their tongues. Or they start looking at each other right away. Now, if you can scrape off that white, it's waste. But if you can't scrape it off, they're little fungal buds at the back of your tongue. So number one, starve it. And in my book I have programs for that. Basically you've got to stop all sugars and even fruits, just Granny Smith apples, grapefruit, even the berries, they're quite low. So lots of vegetables. No peanuts. Unless I'm starving and there's nothing else to eat, I don't eat peanuts. But really, we're not starving, are we? You see, peanut is a legume that grows in the ground. That's why it's so prone. It's so prone to mould growth. So you've got to turn off the tap. Kill. We do have to get away from the kill mentality, but there are herbs that will kill fungus and won't kill you, praise God. And in Psalm 104 verse 14, the Bible says God gave herbs for the service of man. I love that. They come in to serve you. Drugs come in and say, get out of my way, I've got a job to do whether you need it or not. Whereas herbs serve. So these herbs will kill fungus and will not kill you. Garlic's a good one. Olive leaf extract is another one. They're all listed in my book. Also, grapefruit seed extract. Have you ever eaten a grapefruit and bitten into a seed? You'll think the grapefruit's sweet when you bite that seed. It's very bitter, strong volatile oils in there that are antifungal. In fact, if you can get the grapefruit seed extract and put a drop on a fungus toenail, it'll wipe that one out. Also, portiaco. Portiaco is a South American herb that's got strong antifungal properties. There are also some really good essential oils like oregano essential oil, thyme essential oil, clove essential oil. What I suggest, and I advise this in my book, is the person alternate. Now, do you remember what these microbes do? They just adapt and adjust. They just adapt and adjust. And that's why it's a good idea to do 2 weeks on this herb, 2 weeks on this herb, 2 weeks on that herb. What's golden staph? It is a bacteria that's just adapted and adjusted, so hardly anything kills it now. But there is a herb that will. Golden seal will kill golden staph. Isn't God good? Now remember, when someone's got an outgrowth of that, there needs to be a knocking back of it and then a bringing back into balance, because the fact is every single one of us have golden staph. It's only when it's out of control. And why would it be out of control? Well, the third point is bring back the balance. Flood the gastrointestinal tract with the good guys. There's your probiotics. Antibiotic means against life. Probiotic means for life. So there your Lactobacillus acidophilus bifidus bacterium, healthy bacteria, friendly bacteria they're called, good flora. When we look at the gut tomorrow night, we'll be taking a journey through the gut. The fourth point is alkalize. Alkalize the gut. The most alkalizing foods are your vegetables, and of the vegetable kingdom, the most alkalizing of all the vegetable kingdom is greens. We should be having dark green leafy vegetables every day. You can even buy chlorophyll drops. So even putting a little bit of chlorophyll into your water. Now, at Misty Mountain Health Retreat, we have a few programs that we do to help people conquer cancer. You can have fungus in your body and not have cancer, but if it's not dealt with, it certainly can develop that way. So I'll give you the story of a lady named Elizabeth Cott. She came to us, I think it's 4 years ago now, and she had she didn't have breast cancer, she had 3 tumours in her abdomen. And the doctor said, you got to have chemo immediately. This is serious. They're fast growing. This lady was in her late 50s at the time. She saw one of my lectures on conquering cancer, and she decided not to go with the chemo, but to come to our retreat. And so when she came to our retreat, I put her on a program where with cancer we stop all fruit, all sweets, very little carbohydrates. What do they eat? Lots of vegetables, legumes, nuts and seeds, every meal. We gave her the herbs, alternating every couple of weeks. We gave her the probiotics. We blended wild greens with water, and she drank 1 litre of that every day. And we wrapped her in what we call sodium bicarbonate wraps. Now, Dr. Tullio Simoncini, he injects the sodium bicarbonate straight into the cancer. Well, I'm not a doctor, and I don't have the ability to make a portacath and put it straight in. And so what we do, I got this recipe off a Canadian doctor named Dr. Emma Fields. And she grilled me for 2 hours before she gave it to me. I wasn't asking her for it, but she just wanted to know if I knew my stuff. And praise be to God, I must have convinced her that I did. And she gave me the recipe. And it's 2 kilos of sodium bicarb with 5 litres of very hot water and some lemon. And what we do is we dip a towel in, we wring it out, and we wrap the torso and then cover that. Then we wrap the left leg and cover that. Then we wrap the right leg and cover that. Then both arms. And so the whole body from the neck down, every surface area is touched by these hot in sodium bicarbonate infused towels, and then we wrap the whole body in several blankets and shower curtains, and they stay like that for 1 hour. So can you see what we're doing? We're making it impossible for these microbes to live, these fungi. So we starve it with the diet, we give the herbs, we bring back the balance with the probiotic, and the greens are alkalizing from the inside. So you can't drink sodium bicarbonate. All you'll do is neutralise your stomach acid. But the greens, they go into the tissues to alkalise. Can you see that? Now, if someone had stomach cancer, they could drink sodium bicarb just before they went to bed, but not near their meal, because you want your hydrochloric acid to break your food down. So we wrapped her in the wraps. She was with us for 2 weeks, and we did 5 wraps a week. This is a few years ago. Now, since then, we also have a hyperbaric chamber, and a hyperbaric chamber floods oxygen into the body, and cancer cannot live in the presence of oxygen. In my book, I quote Dr. Otto Warburg. He got a Nobel Prize in 1931 for showing that cancer cells hate oxygen, and they consume 15 times the glucose of any other cell. That's why if you can greatly reduce the sweet and oxygenate the body, you're making an environment where cancer finds it almost difficult to survive. This lady went home and she continued religiously the diet. She said to me, "I'm Polish. I was the dessert maker at church, and I used to make pavlovas." And she said, "I made a pavlova about this big, 20 cups of white sugar." Think of that next time someone offers you a slice of pavlova. Huge amount of sugar. She said, "I believe," because she said, "I've been a vegetarian for 20 years. She said, "I believe I was feeding my cancer with sugar." And of course, cancer loves that stuff. So she stuck to the program. She went back to the doctor 3 months later. Do you remember what he said to her at first? "You got to do something straight away." She went to the doctor, he tested, he looked at her, he said, "Oh, come and see me in 6 months." She went back a year later. He said, "One of your tumours is gone." All her levels were normal. She was on several medications, high blood pressure, diabetes. She was on sleep apnea machine. All of that's gone now. She said, "I've lost 10 kilos in weight." So that would be, 20 pounds? She said, "I feel better now," and she's in her 60s now, she said, "than when I was in my 40s. Another year later, another tumour went. Now, it's 4 years later now. She said, when she goes to the doctor, her oncologist is there, her specialist there, her doctor's there, and they're just looking at her. They can't believe what's happening to her. She said that she'd been given about 6 months to live. Well, it's 4 years later now. One tumour is still there, but sometimes they just stay there, but they don't do anything. Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, American doctor who was having huge success with treating cancer. Unfortunately, he's passed now. So a few question marks too about his passing. But I read an interview of him, and the interviewer said, "Tell me of your success rate." He said, "Well, it's like this." He said, "If a diabetic does everything right, they can control their diabetes." He said, "It's the same with cancer. If they do everything right, it can be controlled." He said, "Some of my patients, the tumour's still there, and it's 10 years later, it's not doing anything. Some of my patients, the tumour's gone." He said, I can never predict." What an amazing body we live in. The human body can heal itself if you give it the right conditions. So simple, such simple conditions. So when we get people come to us now who want help to conquer cancer, they might alternate the hyperbaric chamber and the wrap. They might do things like that. Or some people, they'll have a wrap and a hyperbaric chamber every day. It basically, I leave it to the person to what they're able to do. But Henry's law states that under pressure, more gas goes into liquid. Well, that's the hyperbaric chamber, and the gas is oxygen, and the liquid, of course, is blood. And so when you go into the hyperbaric chamber, basically you're flooded with oxygen, and that goes to every cell. And remember, cancer cannot live in the presence of it. The hyperbaric chamber was developed for divers with bends. You've probably heard that. Because the air is 79% nitrogen and 20% oxygen. So when they come up too quickly, the nitrogen goes into little balls. And when they put them in the hyperbaric chamber, it just converts that hydrogen back to a gas and they just expel it. And then they discovered that people with wounds that weren't healing, if they went into the hyperbaric chamber, they were healed purely because of the oxygen. So as I go through the lectures, I'll actually be going inside the cell again and showing you exactly the effect of oxygen. But I'd like to leave you with another story before we end. And this is the story of a man who came to with prostate cancer, and he was 56. He was not really interested in coming to our health retreat. But his mother, no, not his mother, his wife. His wife and his sister were ultra keen. Sorry, his wife and his daughter. His daughter is in her 30s, his wife also early 50s. So every time we were talking, every time I said, well, if you're interested, we can do the wraps. And he went, oh, I suppose so. And his wife and his daughter were saying, yeah, he'll do it. Now, this was everything we did. He was just, oh, I suppose so. And they were, yeah, he'll do it. So going home, I said, well, are you interested in doing the program, continuing it? Because I always ask that. Because a man convinced against his will be of the same opinion still. There's got to be an agreement. And he was just, and his wife and his daughter, yeah, he'll do it. So when they went home, he did everything purely because his wife and his daughter were making everything, and he did it. He went back to the doctor 3 months later and they found no cancer. Now he's interested. But what a blessing to be interested now. And we have a body that can do it. And the stories that I give you are all illustrations of recovery from serious illnesses because the right conditions were given. So when someone says to me, I have this sort of cancer, what can you do? And you know what I say? I can teach you the conditions the body requires for healing. I can heal no one. No herb can heal you. No treatment can heal you. The body alone can heal when it's given the right conditions. So because I make no claims, we make no claims, we're not accountable. Can you see that? But I am accountable for God if I lock up this information and don't make it available to you. So if someone says, what can you do for this condition? I say to people, it depends on many things. It depends on how advanced the condition is. It depends on the age of the person, the seriousness of it, how willing and able the person is to do it. Can you see that? We had a 33-year-old doctor of chiropractic do our program, beautiful young woman, and she had advanced breast cancer. It was like a big rock on her chest, and the skin was breaking down. And I said to her husband, how did it get to this? This was incredibly advanced. And it's rare that you see a turnaround from that. And he said, well, she just didn't do anything about it. And finally, can you see she's come to us in the last 5 minutes just about? Do you know, we could not really do anything for her. She couldn't lie down for the wrap. She couldn't... I ended up going to the local doctor and getting her script filled out for her heavy painkillers. That's all we could do. And unfortunately, she passed only a month later. Can you see how it was very advanced? See, when we first get that knock, that's when we've got to listen. The body says, now, do something now. So this is what I say when people come to me. I say, well, we've seen turnarounds. We've seen a lot of turnarounds. And sometimes we've seen 3 months go to 6 years. Praise God. And sometimes we've seen the last days made more comfortable. So whatever the result, those 3 options are all pluses, aren't they? Because when you have a look, when people say, I'm on chemotherapy for palliative care, I say, palliative care? What sort of palliative care makes your hair fall out? Gives you constant diarrhea, takes away the feelings from your feet and your hands. I wouldn't call that very effective palliative care, would you? But most people are sick through ignorance. And I believe the only hope of better things on planet Earth is the education of people in the right principles. So I trust that I have inspired you to show great respect for this amazing human body that we live in and to look after it. So shall we bow our heads to close? Father in heaven, thank you. Thank you, thank you for this incredible body. Thank you for the knowledge on how to treat it. I pray for every head bowed here, Father, that you will give each one of us wisdom, inspiration and motivation to begin implementing what we need to do so that we can enjoy our bodies a little better and even be better prepared to work for the Master, is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.